My guest tonight is a two-time Oscar-winning actor, writer, and director who's written his first novel. It's called Bob Honey, Who Just Do Stuff. Please welcome Sean Penn. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much.
This is a book that I would fail to describe with the amount of words I have in my vocabulary. It's a strange story that seems like a metaphor for real life. Bob Honey is a character in the book who goes around murdering people. He's a divorced septic tank worker, and he's an assassin who kills old people with a mallet. And yet, when I was reading parts of the book, I was like, but this also feels like real life because it seems like what's happening in the world today. Is it a metaphor?
Well, there was a Norman Mailer many years ago wrote a book about why we were at war in Iraq. And he talked about democracy being very fragile because it was such a noble idea.
Right.
And that our darkest nature is such that we would be very infatuated with a fascism,
right,
if we didn't hold on to this democracy with everything we had. He also suggested that the paradox, and it was when we try to export democracy, we tend to create fascism in other places,
right, and
start to lean that way ourselves. So as I saw and felt the world vulnerable to that, and our world as Americans, I thought, well, the way not to join a kind of common madness would be to laugh.
I understand that.
And I thought you might. And so I thought of this character, Bob Honey. And I thought, here's an American man, and put him, a guy compelled to service,
right,
in a country that doesn't actually demand mandatory service, which is something that I've always felt I missed
right,
out on, and that's something that would be very important in the sense that a young person, who, whether the service is forestry or taking care of the elderly or military, whatever it was, that once one had a significant experience of having been able to make a real contribution themselves,
right,
that never leaves them, and therefore they engage, and by engaging, they're not ignorant. And by not being ignorant, they're not fooled. And they know who to hold accountable in government. So I thought I would take somebody who couldn't find direction of service, but was compelled to service anyway, and put him in the kind of quicksand of this current climate in our country, and see how he danced over it.
And I mean, it is quite a dance that takes us through the book. There's a threatening letter that Bob Honey sends to a fictional president named Mr. Landlord. I don't know who that could be. And it says here, though the office will remain real, you never were, nor will be. You are not simply a president in need of impeachment, you are a man in need of an intervention. We are not simply people in need of an intervention, we are a nation in need of an assassin. So I challenge you to a duel. Tweet me, bitch, I dare you. This is a very dangerous approach for Bob Honey to take in this book. Do you feel like, in many ways, when you were writing this was your catharsis for what you're experiencing in the world right now?
You know, writing for me is much more. It starts as melody before lyrics, and it was really being taken. In fact, you know, this whole idea that is not a new idea, that a writer or a musician or whatever has a muse, or there's some part of you that, or maybe it's not part of us,
right,
that becomes surprising. And when you hear something like that, and you go with it. And so in this case, I stumbled upon these characters, and the first character of it really is the character that is in essence the author of the book. So instead of just saying, well, I have a muse, or I gave it a name.
Right.
And I make him a character in the book who's really kind of the storyteller's voice. And the name is Pappy Pariah. So I think that I didn't declare the mission, I just accepted it. And the mission was to follow the music.
Right. You are a man on a mission in many ways, because after the real life president had the issue with shithole countries, the statement that people reported him saying. You actually wrote a piece about the president's comments and about Haiti. And I guess this really affected you personally because you've been credited as being one of the people who has done something on the ground in Haiti. You've gone in and you've helped people after the earthquake. You've mobilized efforts to assist. Why do you think his comment about Haiti got you in the way that it did?
I immediately flashed on the faces of these beautifully spirited, resilient men, women, and in particular children that I know in Haiti who so love the idea that is the United States of America. And before I thought anybody might get angry about what he'd said, I knew they'd be heartbroken. And it was like, it was bullying, really cruelly bullying, so insensitive. I mean, when we start talking about the character of leadership, the character of people in leadership, I don't really care who they sleep with. That's a problem between them and their wife, perhaps, whatever. It's really, that's not the character I'm interested in.
Right.
I'm interested in the sensitivity to humanity and the earth first. And
that's something that you've displayed over and over again. You haven't been afraid to go out into the world and to engage in some hairy situations. I mean, dealing with Haiti is one thing, but I mean, I remember I was shocked that you wanted to go out and meet with El Chapo. That was a huge story. What did you hope to garner from that moment in meeting him?
yeah, it was interesting. You know, it's a story maybe I'll tell at another forum at some point, because most of the criticism, then there was a lot about that article and so on. They had not, most had not actually read the article.
Right,
There were
right.
regurgitations of other people's
Which is the
initial
internet
comments.
today, yes.
And so I'll never know if the article, when read, would have had the effect I would have hoped that it would have had, which is
Right.
that I always felt that we needed to focus on the demand side more than the supply side, if only because we've been spending trillions of dollars for so many decades in trying to deal with the supply side.
Right, off the drug epidemic, yes.
Yeah, and there have been more people slaughtered in Mexico since the arrest of Chapo than anybody anywhere else in the world that people have slaughtered, other than Syria.
Right.
In the last year and a half or whatever it is, it's something like 30,000 people in a year. So I was interested in talking to that man to try to understand what that psychology was. It's often talked about as an interview, but again, they didn't read the article. It was a meeting to discuss having an interview.
Oh, wow.
And later I sent questions, because then they were raided, and between the Mexican Marines and the DEA, they went after him, and they went into hiding, and I couldn't get back to him.
Right.
I was supposed to have a second visit, because I wasn't able to get in touch with him, and that's when the interview would have happened. But that was the idea.
Right. Before I let you go, you are admired by many people for being someone who genuinely cares for human beings in parts of the world that a lot of people don't care about. Recently, in Venezuela, we've seen some of the biggest flip from a country that was successful and thriving to people thrust into abject poverty, and people being in many ways oppressed by a leader who some regarded as a revolutionary, yourself included at that time. When you look at what's happening now in Venezuela, how do you deal with the fact that you supported a leader who at the time seemed like the right leader to support and has now turned? Is there disappointment? Is there a way you contact him? How do you process that information, and how do you think people can help with what's happening in Venezuela?
I don't mind saying that Hugo Chavez was my friend. He was a man whose initial mission was noble, in that the poor people of that country did, for all intents and purposes, did not exist. They had no identification at all. Within his initial time as president of the country, they often called him dictator, but he went through more elections that were with worldwide observers than anybody has to go through here. And what his mission was to give identity to the poor, and the oligarchs had not done that before him. They had not looked out for their poor. Now, he had a lot of oil, and where there's oil, there's going to be a lot of interventionary politics from other places, including the United States. I think that you become very protectionist at that point. You start to live in a bit of a bubble. But his charisma was such that Elvis could keep it going.
Right.
When Elvis left the building, the institutions were not sound. Corruption was one of the things that he himself was looking to fight in many ways, and died before he had a chance to succeed or fail. And Maduro, who then became president and was his designee, is somebody that I had worked with in a situation related to some hostages in another country, where he was very pleasant, very smart, and that's what I knew about him. I don't think I'd ever written anything or publicly stood with him in support of anything, but I'd worked with him. I think that what can certainly be said is that to be in a situation where Elvis left the building and Chavez had created, it was a great flaw, a power of personality.
Right.
So the smoke and mirrors of holding that country up left. And then you had somebody who's really not a competent manager to begin with Maduro. And with a country so ready to go wrong, oh boy, did it. And now it's certainly time for a very diplomatic change as designated by the Venezuelan people.
Before I let you go, one thing I would love to know from you, and to very few people I would ask this question and expect a candid response. Meeting with the people you've met in the world, do you think that we get the full story of what America's doing in the world and how they are shaping what direction the world is going in, having spoken to some of the people who deal with America from the other side?
Yes, I mean, I think we're at about 28% of the country that has passports. And then there are various economic reasons why people aren't able to travel.
Right.
And without that context, I think we do suffer. And I think that news organizations, including some very well-intended ones, in the competition of commercial news, are so forced to focus on those sensational stories that even that which they might be able to transport us, to be able to share with us the context from the other side, there's just no room for it in this kind of dog-eat-dog of it. So we have a very monocultural, sensationalist news cycle. There's generally speaking, and I've seen a big change, when the Berlin Wall came down, I think it had a lot more to do with Levi's 501s and the dream of wearing them, and the Beatles' black market records, than it did with Gorbachev or Reagan. Right. It's just human dreaming having a power to make a change. The human dreaming, so much of it was to take the American model, the dream that is that. And increasingly now, I think that what we are is the most armed of existing democracies. And beyond that, I don't think that I would say that the respect and the aspiration that we modeled is no longer on our country. That's not a political comment. Right. That's a touristic comment. Where I've traveled, it's changed. And I think we owe it to ourselves to get it back. And the only way we do that is show that we know how to stop fighting with each other. Right. And really listen to each other and really demand that our politicians do the job. And in this case, the job includes, by any historical parallel, the impeachment of this president.
You're a fascinating man. I appreciate the work. Thank you for being on the show. Bob Honey, who just do stuff, is available now. Sean Penn, everybody.